From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Violence broke out in Nicaragua on Wednesday during marches to mark the country's Mother's Day. At least 5 people were killed, 4 of them members of the Sandinista youth. People wearing hoods fired guns and mortars at families taking part in a pro-government rally, leaving 12 injured, including 5 police officers. Opposition groups allegedly burned down government offices and the state radio station headquarters. 2 opposition media companies were also attacked. Since April 18, Nicaragua has suffered a wave of violence despite the attempts at peace talks between Daniel Ortega's government and opposition groups.
People want this situation and this crisis to end, and the only way is to show them that this movement is irreversible and there is no turning back. People want to peacefully demonstrate their desire to find a peaceful solution to this problem.
It's horrible not being with our boy who was killed, because in all reality he was sincere. He was with us on Mother's Day last year, and if you needed something, he was there. And it's really hard for our daughter, really hard.
Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega has called for all parties to come together to continue the talks. He said it was the only way for the country to overcome this crisis. During a rally, Ortega reminded supporters that the country had recovered after the civil war it suffered until 1990. The president called for the end to division and said that the only way to move forward is by building peace. The government has allowed the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the Organization of American States to investigate the recent violent events. The Catholic Church has been promoting a dialogue between different parties, but so far it has been unsuccessful.
Nicaraguans were asked what do they prefer if violence or peace. I am sure that all of them, 99.9%, will say peace. Only a minority prefers war, confrontation. But of course we want a peace with justice, a peace with healthcare, with education for the poor, for the people, a peace with the right to work. We want a peace for all Nicaraguan families, security for all Nicaraguan families, from the richest to the poorest, because we all have the same rights before God and before the rule of law. We, Nicaraguans, want the challenge to make a path towards peace.
Nicaraguan Vice President Rosario Murillo joined Ortega's call for peace and said Nicaraguan families deserve peace.
We have to work towards life, towards hope. This May 30 is a difficult day, but we, as Christians, cannot lose hope. Mothers and families here in Nicaragua defend peace. We have faith.
Moving to Colombia, where former candidate Sergio Fajardo says he will cast a blank ballot in the second round of the presidential elections to be held on June 17. There were rumors he would support leftist candidate Gustavo Petro, but Fajardo decided not to choose him, nor right-wing candidate Iván Duque. In a public letter, Fajardo said, "Neither Duque nor Petro, neither of them represents what we want for Colombia." And we continue in Colombia, where a fundraising campaign has been launched to help former candidate and peace negotiator Humberto de la Calle settle a debt he ran up for his presidential campaign expenses. A Friends of de la Calle group has begun an online fundraising campaign to help him repay a loan of over $500,000. Colombia gives state funds to candidates who get over 4% of the votes, but de la Calle only achieved 2%. The 71-year-old candidate for the Liberal Party is widely recognized for his contribution towards peace. He led the team that negotiated a peace agreement with the FARC back in 2016.
On Sunday, I got the worst defeat that a politician has gotten. And now what I see is a huge mobilization of solidarity. I love you very much. Thank you very much.
While outgoing President Juan Manuel Santos has signed the country's entrance to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. At a ceremony in Paris, Santos said he was proud to finally join the bloc and that his country's experience will contribute to the organization. Lithuania also joined the OECD. Colombia will also enter the military alliance NATO as its first Latin American strategic partner.
So we can say that we have profited immensely from this accession process, and we also believe Colombia can humbly contribute with our own experiences to enrich the work of this great organization. Colombia is very proud to be the member number 37 of the OECD.
However, some have criticized Santos' decision as a threat to Colombia's sovereignty. During his visit to the European Parliament in Strasbourg, protesters held signs saying, "Stop NATO interference in Latin America and the Caribbean." They demanded an end to the murders of political leaders and the release of political prisoners in Colombia. The Canadian government announced further sanctions on key Venezuelan figures. Among those hit are Cilia Flores, Venezuela's First Lady and a member of the National Constituent Assembly. The news release stated that sanctions targeting 14 individuals come as response to the May 20th presidential elections with the aim to maintain pressure on the Venezuelan government. And Venezuela's foreign ministry released a response strongly rejecting the new unilateral coercive measures. In the communiqué, the foreign ministry referred to the behavior as obsessive on the part of the Canadian government, saying it demonstrates an apparent superiority complex. The note also said the Canadian authorities put forth the policy to avoid losing benefits in trade agreements with the United States. We're taking a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. In Argentina, senators have agreed to control the rising cost of essential utilities. A new law will bring prices of water, electricity, and gas back to the levels they had in November 2017. The measures will only allow tariffs increase in line with users' salaries or pensions. The move was proposed by the opposition and is expected to be vetoed by President Mauricio Macri. Oil workers protested in front of the headquarters of Brazilian oil state company Petrobras on the first day of a 72-hour strike. The protest was sparked by discontent over high fuel and cooking gas costs in the country. Demonstrators are demanding the resignation of Petrobras CEO Pedro Parente and the end of a market-based pricing policy that was put in place by President Michel Temer. Oil unions say a much larger strike will be held next if their demands are not met.
Our main reason for this strike is this pricing policy that Pedro Parente has put in place, which favors foreign investors more than the people themselves.
We are against the sale of our refineries, and we want a publicly owned Petrobras company that will fulfill its social function. We will produce, refine, and fix the price of fuels and cooking gas at a price that people can afford.
We continue in Brazil, where U.S. actor Danny Glover visited the Lula camp in Curitiba, outside the federal police headquarters, where former President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva is being detained on corruption charges.
Visit here is not symbolic. I'm here on the behalf of hundreds and thousands and million people in the world who demand that Lula be freed.
The visit comes just as Lula da Silva has had his prison rights restored. The decision was made by a court in Sao Paulo that gave Lula all the rights recognized by the Brazilian law. Lula lost these rights last May, and his lawyers appealed this decision. The former Brazilian president was detained last April after being sentenced to 12 years and 1 month in prison.
U.S. actor and UN ambassador
Glover also met the parents of murdered counselor Mariel Franco, social movements, and government officials to discuss the case. Glover also listened to complaints from residents of a favela in Rio and from representatives of Afro-Brazilian religions who denounced the violations suffered by the community. Relatives of the journalists abducted and murdered on the border with Colombia have been given back the victims' personal belongings, but they are still waiting for the bodies to be returned to Ecuador.
Months have passed since the kidnapping and murder of the Ecuadorian journalist on the Colombian border. Now, the Ecuadorian authorities are handing over some of their personal belongings to their relatives. Christian, the son of their driver Efraín Segarra, recovered his father's car.
También es un homenaje para todos los conductores que
It is a tribute to all of the drivers who accompany working journalists in their work, to the photographers and the journalists. It is a tribute, and it is with gratitude to all those that have supported us in this unfortunate event.
The car which transported the journalist team to Mataje was found in the town by the Ecuadorian military forces. The relatives drove around the city in honor of their loved one.
On the day of the declassification, I saw a document that had photographs of my father next to the truck. It's really painful to only have the truck and that there is no justice or investigation into what happened. We realize the responsibility of those who should be providing security. Already today, they are not with us, and their work has not been completed.
The meeting point of both friends and relatives was at the tribune located on Chiles in the Ecuadorian capital, where they continue to speak for answers from the governments involved.
Since the delivery of the documents have been made, they are really absent in understanding and have already completed their cycle through the government. The actions really say that there are no answers, nobody, so it seems that it's not important for them to repatriate them.
The governments of Ecuador and Colombia said the suspect in the murders is Guacho, leader of the armed group Oliver Sinisterra, who is also currently accused of the kidnapping of the couple that is still missing on the northern border. The relatives are also expecting answers from the Ecuador's government to continue in order to the first meeting of the special commission organized by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to investigate the case. Denise Herrera, Telesur Quito, Ecuador.
Violent police attacks on students have been on the rise in Chile. In just 1 week, 3 schools have been violently evicted by police, leaving children with serious injuries.
student was left unconscious after brutal police repression last Monday in the Confederación Suiza school. Parent groups went to visit him at the hospital and they also announced they will take legal action against those responsible.
We reject with great conviction the extreme violence that the government of Sebastián Piñera is using against student protesters. They are exercising irrational repression that also drifts towards torture, which puts the lives of the students at risk.
Student Carlos Valdovinos arrived unconscious to the hospital with signs of strangulation. This diagnosis was confirmed by the student when he woke up.
He says the policemen started fighting him, and since they couldn't subdue him, they started to choke him with a piece of cloth, he told. Then he couldn't breathe, but they didn't care, so he lost consciousness. Witnesses say that once he was unconscious, they threw him into a police car and brought him here.
The feminist wave that took over the country also took over some of the most renowned schools that on this day and age are still divided by gender. This is why students are protesting for non-sexist education, but the police in Chile are suppressing protests as if this were a war. What is most outrageous for the parents of these students is that what happened with the students who almost lost his life happened merely days after the brutal repression against the National Institute.
I started taking pictures and trying to separate policemen from students when a tear gas canister hit my head. In that moment, I didn't realize that I had a cut, but after some time, blood started coming down. The scar is still there.
This violence shook authorities into investigating the events and carrying out the required protocols.
When we enter a school, the police need to have the equipment necessary to protect themselves and students. There is no protocol that says they should throw chairs. That's beyond any police protocol or code of conduct.
It's apparent only policemen have yet to know this fact, because no changes have been made after the emergency meeting following the acts of violence.
Chile's Supreme Court has ruled that transgender citizens can change their name and gender on state documents without a sex change operation to prove their gender identity. The ruling said that Chile guarantees citizens' rights without discrimination based on race, gender, language, religion, political opinion, or any other social condition. The court concluded that gender identity is an essential part of a person's self-identity. A month away from the elections, electoral campaigns in Mexico continue. They are considered historic due to the high number of participants. Let's see how the 4 candidates are placed in polls.
And candidate from Juntos Haremos Historia, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, remains the favorite to win the upcoming presidential election in Mexico. A recent study in the most important newspaper in the country confirmed it. According to polls, the left-wing candidate is 27 points ahead of conservative Ricardo Anaya, leaving José Antonio Meade with a mere 19%.
In the case of PRI, they are interested in keeping power in some bastions, some districts and towns. I've heard it from PRI members themselves. They don't want to lose all power in some important states. This is the same with PAN.
In an attempt to keep order in the polls, the General Council of the National Electoral Institute issued a set of rules that included prior registration of any opinion poll.
The National Electoral Institute has to issue a set of methodological criteria that is accepted by the survey industry and that is binding for all the polls that are published during the ongoing electoral process.
López Obrador's popularity has held fast since the beginning of the electoral process in 2017, despite counter-campaigns by some powerful businessmen, such as Germán Larrea, the CEO of Grupo México, Mexico's largest mining corporation. Larrea sent letters to his employees suggesting they vote for the ruling party.
I understand their concerns because Germán Larrea has been one of the most important businessmen during the current neoliberal period, a good businessman and also a good influence peddler.
Meanwhile, support for López Obrador's campaign floods social networks. On July 1st, 89.1 million Mexicans are eligible to vote. Besides choosing a new president, they will choose 128 senators, 500 lower house representatives, and renew 9 state governments, including the government of the capital city.
The United Nations Human Rights Office received testimonies that Mexican federal security forces are behind a wave of disappearances in and around the city of Nuevo Laredo in Tamaulipas state. Between February and May this year, the UN has documented the disappearance of 21 men and 2 women, including 5 minors. A local human rights organization put the number of disappearances at more than 40.
The Human Rights Office has documented 21 cases of disappearances in Nuevo Laredo in Tamaulipas over the past 4 months, and there are strong indications that members of a federal security force may have been involved in their disappearances.
Now to the Caribbean, with hurricane season due to officially begin on June 1st, Grenada's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Mitchell is challenging the Caribbean to learn the lessons from the 2017 hurricane season, which devastated many in the region. The Prime Minister says regional governments need to include climate change resilience in development planning. For that, Mitchell created a new government Ministry of Climate Change, Environment, Fisheries, Forestry and Disaster Management. Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley toured the Graham Hall Nature Sanctuary to see firsthand the sewage problem on the island's south coast. After this visit, she said the Grenadian government was asked to assist the Barbados Water Authority in the repair of the leaking sewer lines. The sewage crisis began earlier this year, and Motley called the situation a national emergency. Urgent repairs will now begin under the guidance of the authority, the Coastal Zone Unit, Environmental Agency, and the Barbadian Association of Engineers. They will draft a cabinet paper to recommend solutions to the sewage problem. We're taking another short break, but join us again after this video from our multimedia team.
Make the people and resend all of it.
Thanks for joining us again. One of the most powerful North Korean officials, General Kim Yong-chol, has met U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in New York to discuss a planned summit between the leaders of their two countries. Kim is the most senior North Korean envoy to hold talks on U.S. soil in nearly 2 decades. The meeting with Pompeo is in preparations for an historic summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. The on and off summit is being closely watched by the international community. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Ministry Sergei Lavrov has met North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in the capital Pyongyang. Lavrov discussed the nuclear program and bilateral ties between the two countries. His visit comes amid preparations for a planned summit between Trump and Kim. Commenting on the U.S. demands for the meeting, Lavrov said a country cannot achieve denuclearization in one sitting. There must be several stages, and every stage must be a two-way discussion. Somali authorities have brought 151 migrants back from Libya. Here's more on that and some other stories making headlines around the world.
In Libya, 151 Somali migrants confined in government-run detention centers for months have been freed. 150 others are still to return. The group of migrants was detained as they attempted to cross the Mediterranean Sea to Europe last year. Their return was negotiated with the help of the Somali government in collaboration with the International Organization for Migration and the European Union. It has been reported the migrants were enslaved while detained in Libya.
I'm very happy that we could help these boys because these boys go through a very difficult time there in Libya. They are being the smugglers request a lot of money, they get kidnapped, they get beaten, they are exposed to a lot of harassment and abuses, nothing to drink, nothing to eat.
In Madrid, the Spanish parliament is debating the no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy. The motion was called by the main opposition Socialist Party after a court sentenced last week 29 people linked to Rajoy's Popular Party on corruption charges. Rajoy has been in power since 2011. U.S. film producer Harvey Weinstein has been indicted on charges of rape and a criminal sexual act by a New York City grand jury. The indictment comes less than a week after he was arrested. Police have said the crimes took place between 2004 and 2013. He's being investigated into numerous accounts of sexual abuses. Weinstein has denied all allegations.
And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But as you know, this and other stories you can find on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And be sure to also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.